You probably know the story, right? After the great flood, Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk, passes out, and his son Ham sees him. What happens next is this mysterious, powerful curse. But what if the story we all think we know is just a cover for something much, much darker? Well, today we're essentially opening a biblical cold case. We're going to use some serious analytical tools to figure out what really went down in Noah's tent. All right, let's get into it.
So, here's how we're going to crack this thing. First, we'll look at the problems in the case file itself, the biblical text. Then, we'll hunt for clues to find our prime suspect and figure out what the crime actually was. We'll examine a couple of competing theories, we'll debunk a really damaging myth that's been attached to this story for centuries, and finally, we'll uncover the real motive behind it all.
Okay, so let's open up that case file. The story in Genesis 9 seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but when you look closer, man, there are some major inconsistencies. And we're not talking about minor typos. These are huge narrative gaps that make you question the entire traditional reading of the story. It absolutely demands a deeper look.
And here are the two core mysteries staring us right in the face. First, there's the issue of who even did it. The text says it was Noah's ben-Hakatan, his youngest son. But wait a minute. All the family trees in the Bible list Ham as the middle son. So who are we talking about here? And second, the punishment just doesn't fit the crime or the criminal. The story says Ham saw his father, but then his son Canaan, who wasn't even there as far as we know, is the one who gets hit with this awful curse. Why punish the kid for something his dad supposedly did? These are the questions that kick off our whole investigation.
Let's start with that first clue. If we're going to solve this thing, we have to know who our perpetrator is. Who is this youngest son? Turns out, the answer is hidden in the details of the original Hebrew language.
So, this is the central question, isn't it? Who was Noah's ben-Hakatan? Like we said, the family trees are clear: Shem, Ham, Japheth. Han's in the middle, so calling the offender the youngest son is a direct contradiction. Scholars have been wrestling with this for ages. And the solution isn't just about looking at the family tree, it's about understanding the words used to describe it. And boom, here it is, the linguistic key that unlocks this part of the puzzle. The Hebrew word ben. Now we translate it as son, but in Hebrew it's way more flexible than that. Yeah, it can mean your direct kid, but it's used all the time to mean any male descendant. A grandson, a great-grandson, you name it. A perfect example is Jesus being called Ben David, the son of David, generations later. Getting your head around this is the first major breakthrough in the case. Okay, so check this out. If we apply this flexible meaning of the word Ben, a totally new suspect pops up. The evidence? Genesis 10:6 tells us that Canaan was the youngest son of Ham. So, if ben-Hakatan actually means Noah's youngest descendant or grandson, well then the text is pointing its finger directly at Canaan. This grandson resolution theory is just elegant. It solves both of our big problems in one go. The whole penalty issue disappears. Why is Canaan cursed? Because Canaan was the one who did it. Simple as that. All right, so now that we have our prime suspect, Canaan, we can move on. What exactly was the crime? I mean, a curse to become a slave of slaves seems unbelievably harsh for just accidentally seeing someone naked, right? Even your father. The punishment is so severe, it strongly suggests the crime was something way, way worse than just looking.
To get what happened, we need another linguistic clue. The story says the perpetrator saw Noah's nakedness. But in the legal books of the Bible, there's a specific Hebrew idiom for this kind of offense. Gala erva. It literally translates to uncover nakedness. But in the legal codes, like Leviticus, this isn't about seeing. It's a technical, legal term, and it means one thing and one thing only: forbidden sexual intercourse. This is a game changer.
And we don't even have to guess. We have a slam-dunk piece of textual evidence right here. Leviticus 20:11 gives us a crystal-clear definition. It says, "The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness." See? It's not about seeing something. It's about doing something, a specific sexual act. It means that by sleeping with his father's wife, a son has sexually violated his own father. This connection is so strong, it suggests the incident in Noah's tent was an active sexual crime. So, let's put the pieces together. The biblical evidence itself is pointing us toward a pretty radical conclusion. When Noah wakes up, the text says he knew what his youngest son had done to him. You take that legal language, you add the sheer severity of the curse, and it leads to a conclusion that's kind of unavoidable. The crime wasn't just looking, it was a kind of sexual assault, an attack on the patriarch himself. This conclusion, of course, just opens up a whole new set of questions. If a sexual crime happened, what was it exactly? And why? Scholars have come up with two main theories that try to explain the specifics of what went down.
Okay, so there are two leading theories here. The first is what's called the maternal incest theory. The idea here is that the perpetrator slept with Noah's wife. In the ancient world, this was a classic power move, a way to steal the leader's authority. We even see it later in the Bible with Absalom and his father David's concubines. In this scenario, Canaan gets the curse because he's the illegitimate son born from that union. The second theory is a direct assault on Noah, either sodomy or even castration, designed to humiliate him or stop him from having any more heirs. And in that case, Canaan is cursed because he's the one who personally carried out the attack.
Now, before we get to the final motive, we have to deal with the long, dark shadow this story has cast on history. For centuries, this passage was horribly twisted into something called the Curse of Ham. It was weaponized to create a fake theological excuse for racism and slavery. Honestly, it's one of the most destructive misreadings of a text in all of history, and it's absolutely crucial that we take it apart piece by piece, using the facts from the text itself.
Here is the lie, laid bare. For centuries, people argued that because Ham was thought to be the ancestor of African peoples, the curse on his son Canaan was actually a curse on all people of African descent, marking them for slavery. Let's be perfectly clear, this is a complete fabrication. It's an idea forced onto the text for evil purposes, and it has absolutely no basis in what the Bible actually says.
This quote from the Genesis 9, the Curse of Canaan exegesis, just nails it. It's an eisegetical fabrication. That's a fancy academic term that means you're forcing a meaning onto a text that just isn't there. The Bible is incredibly specific. Noah does not curse Ham, he curses Canaan. The curse isn't racial, it's on one guy and his specific descendants, the Canaanites, who lived in a specific place, the land that would become Israel. It's a political and a geographical curse, not a racial one, period.
So if the curse wasn't about race, what was its purpose? Why tell this incredibly disturbing story at all? To get that, you have to understand what the story was designed to do for its original audience. This is what scholars call an etiology, basically an origin story with a very powerful political agenda.
For ancient Israel, this story did a few very important things. First, it gave them an origin story that explained why their main rivals, the Canaanites, were destined to be servants. Second, it acted as a divine permission slip for Israel's future military conquest of that land. It wasn't a land grab, it was the fulfillment of prophecy. And finally, it reinforced a theme you see throughout the Bible, that Canaanite culture was corrupt and sexually deviant. In fact, one analysis in Scripture and Situation describes getting rid of them as being like removing a social cancer.
So let's wrap this up. Let's close this biblical cold case. The explanation that fits all the evidence looks like this. Number 1, the perpetrator wasn't Ham, it was Canaan, Noah's youngest descendant. Number 2, the crime wasn't just looking, it was a serious sexual power play. And number 3, the reason the story was told in the first place was to create a powerful political and religious justification for Israel to conquer its enemies.
You know, this whole investigation is just a powerful reminder of how badly a text can be twisted to serve agendas its original authors never ever intended. It just shows how critical it is to pay attention to context, to read carefully, and to ask what a story meant to the people who first heard it. When we strip away all the layers of misinterpretation and just read these texts for what they are, we don't just solve a puzzle. We get a much more authentic and yet often more challenging picture of the past. And that really leaves us with one final thought. How does our understanding change when we read ancient texts as they were written, not as they have been misused?